They came for Benjamin 2 days after the start of the war. A team of 5 neatly dressed civic commandos, their newly printed ceramo armor gleaming, sent forth from the nearby Carter Arcology. They arrived an hour past dawn and presented writs and warrants to the compound's housekeeping staff and shoved their way past the main airlock. The 5-member team proceeded to search, scan, and record every detail of every room while being careful not to damage or disturb anything in the process. This was the home of a landowner, a rarity on Mars, and they knew better than to toss the place. They took their time. There was no question of anyone slipping out through a back way or an access tunnel. The compound's blueprints had been thoroughly reviewed and a civic commando positioned at each auxiliary exit before the main team knocked on the front door. The search found nothing of interest, though one of the commandos did suffer a minor burn while attempting to inspect a tureen of morning soup Cook had prepared, and in due time they climbed the ramp to the living quarters on the second floor, where they passed through the master bedroom and politely knocked upon the door of the adjacent solarium. Benjamin and his wife Kwan, long since alerted by staff, met their invaders fully awake, dressed for a typical day's work, and as cooperative as could be expected given the circumstances. "Benjamin Lee Wrongpin," said one of the commandos, utterly anonymous in their gray ceramo body armor, but differentiated from the others by a lieutenant's trio of jagged red lines across the chest plate, like the marks left by a wild animal's claws. "Identify yourself." Filtered through a comm unit, the voice sounded resonant and likely female. Benjamin and Kwan looked at one another. Each wore a loose-fitting tunic and slacks of pico fiber cloth dyed in the shimmery dusky blue of the compound's main motif, matching slippers, and dark headbands containing their netwear gear. Kwan gave him a merry smile, to which Benjamin responded with a curt but still perceptible shake of his head. His wife sighed, nodded just as slightly, and pouted. He turned his full attention to the lieutenant who had asked the question. "I'm Benjamin," he said. "Are you Professor Benjamin Lee Wrongpin, the neotechnologist?" "If you know of another one, I'd like to meet him." "Do you confirm or deny the designation?" Yes, that's me. I'm him, whatever. To whom do I have the honor of speaking this morning?" The commando grunted. "Someone who wants only answers and no questions from you. Is that clear?" "Very clear," said Kwan. Her voice was melodic, a singer's voice. "But we have to call you something. It would be rude not to. I think Serendipity is a nice name, don't you? Yes, that will do." Benjamin cleared his throat, as if to interpose himself between his wife and the lead commando, thought better of it, and instead said, "You'll have to excuse my wife. She is unwell, and her condition often manifests as a preternatural playfulness. We'll, of course, be happy to answer and assist you in any way we can." Kwan glanced at her husband again, shrugged, and added, "Yes, of course, that's what I meant. How can we help you, Serendipity?" The commando ignored her. "Professor Benjamin Lee Wrongpin, you are the Sapienza Chair of Design at the Innovation Institute in the Yokohama Metro Corp on Earth?" "Well, technically, yes, but only because they refused to appoint anyone else. I'm on something of a permanent sabbatical." "Are you a Mars citizen?" "I am." "But not a native." Both husband and wife smiled at that, and Benjamin waved one hand at himself, a long gesture that started at his chest and swept down to include his legs and feet. After more than a century, the arcologies of Mars had standardized a series of beneficial mutations suited to the lighter gravity. Kwan, while shorter than the average Marzi, had a good 5 centimeters of height on her husband. "Obviously not," he said. "I emigrated as an adult and became a naturalized citizen 10 years ago." "You might also have noticed he's Caucasian," said Kwan. "Not to be racist, but when was the last time you saw a white Marzi? I mean, really?" The lieutenant, whose name happened to be Wynne, ignored the wife and spoke directly to Benjamin. You are a native of Earth? Benjamin shrugged, gestured again. At the time, there wasn't any other place I could have emigrated from. One of the other four commandos, half of whom had worked their way into the solarium while another searched the bedroom, and the remaining member of the cohort kept the hallway secure, chuckled, though the acoustics of their comm systems made it unclear specifically who had done so. The lieutenant kicked the nearest of her team in the shin and returned her attention to Benjamin. Save the commentary, she said. Serendipity, shame on you, said Quan. If you can't behave and play nice, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Ma'am, I'm here under the authority of the Carter Arcology and empowered by the Emergency War Powers Act. My team and I will behave as we see fit, and when we leave, we'll be taking your husband with us as a potential traitor, enemy of the state, and persona non grata. That's persona non grata, said Quan. It's not Grish, it's Latin. Quan, please, not now, said Benjamin, his tone lacking the whimsy of his wife's. He hunched his shoulders and offered an apologetic look at the lieutenant. Oh, please, said Quan, turning to her husband and ignoring the commandos. If Serendipity here is going to use a dead language, she can at least use it correctly. Her husband nodded. You're right, of course, but this may not be the best time to be arguing points of linguistic accuracy, especially considering they intend to haul me off. That's true. I apologize. Quan turned back to the commando she dubbed Serendipity. I'm sorry. I get distracted early in the day. My meds haven't kicked in quite yet. Please don't take it personally. Ma'am, meds? Are you currently under the influence of pharmaceuticals that have the potential to impair your judgment? And if so, do you represent that such pharmaceuticals are legally prescribed? Quan looked puzzled and turned to consult her husband, but the commando interrupted her. Ma'am, don't look to him for answers. Look at me and reply. Now. Honestly, Serendipity, I'm not very good at keeping track of such things. If you won't permit me to consult my husband, you'll just have to ask my physician. She has regular hours back in Carter, but mind you, she can be very difficult to contact. Will you please confirm that you are in fact Quan Yao Li? Of course I am. Are you expecting to find someone else in my bedroom solarium with my husband? The commando ignored the question. And will you further confirm that he is your husband? I thought I just did. Ma'am, please. Quan smiled and struck a dramatic pose, one arm raised theatrically, her chin up, her eyes wide as she intoned, I have no other but a woman's reason. I think him so, because I think him so. Wynne frowned. Ma'am? My wife likes to quote Shakespeare, said Benjamin. That was much ado? Quan slipped out of character, pouted, and stamped her foot. Benny! Two gentlemen, not much ado. Honestly. What are you talking about? Again, my apologies, Lieutenant. Shakespeare was a writer from Earth's history. It's not exactly standard Grish. No one reads him anymore, which is part of why my wife likes to quote his works. The lieutenant paused to consult her records. Ma'am, my intel profile of you contains no mention of psychopharmacologicals. I will certainly follow up with your physician, but in the meantime, I will need you to provide me with a full list of the drugs you have recently ingested. Quan rolled her eyes. That's certainly none of your business, Serendipity. And really, it's quite rude of you to inquire. Don't they teach you any manners in Carter? Ma'am, as I've already indicated, my team and I are empowered by the Emergency War Powers Act. You will cooperate with me in all ways and submit to my authority. Wynne stepped closer and used her full Marzi height to loom over Quan. If the shorter woman felt threatened in any way, she didn't show it. Instead, she winked at the commando, once with each eye, and broke out into the widest of grins. No, I don't think so, said Quan. You don't think so? I'm a property owner, said Quan, her entire demeanor shifting from a sprightly waif to a hardened university professor. And you are 17 kilometers beyond the nearest vacuum wall of the Carter Arcology. 14 of those 7 kilometers, in fact, belong to me, and I have, unknowingly, but all the same graciously, allowed you to tread upon my land. That being the case, I would appreciate it if you and your people would start behaving like proper guests. Ma'am, you have no jurisdiction over me, and your silly Emergency Act makes that abundantly clear. Go back and reread it. She turned back to her husband, and all seriousness fell away again, leaving her unconcerned and irreverent. Honestly, Benny, you'd think they'd quiz them on the particulars before they send them out. Quan, please don't antagonize the good lieutenant. I'm just saying. She's come in here mispronouncing Latin and not knowing the limitations of her authority, and she expects us to take her seriously. Quan, please. Ms. Lee, I am fully aware of the limits of my authority under the War Powers Act, and while it does not extend to affect your person in any way, that is the edge of its limits. As I am sure you are also aware, the special provenance and privilege of landowners is not transferable to those who dwell at, toil on, or visit such property. I can and will detain or incarcerate any staff or other employee here as I see fit, up to and including your husband. Actually, no, you can't, said Benjamin. Excuse me? Lieutenant's calm failed to filter the rising tone of pique in her voice. Your authority doesn't extend to me either, said Benjamin, and in contrast, he sounded almost apologetic. I'm as landed as my wife. More serendipity, said Quan, nodding vigorously, her smile still radiant. Don't forget about the lab, Benny. Oh, right, sorry. More. That's not possible, said Lieutenant Wynne. You're an immigrant. Benjamin nodded. Yes, we established that. Under Marz law, said the lieutenant, and by the clipped and once more professional sound of her voice, she was clearly reading off of some internal document in her helmet. Immigrants are not permitted to purchase real property, even in the unlikely event that such real property becomes available. All true, said Benjamin. Then you're not landed, said Wynne triumphantly, and thus not immune to my authority. He is serendipity, said Quad. Honestly, the quality archaeological education system is seriously lacking. Wynne ignored her and spoke directly to Benjamin. You just agreed that immigrants like yourself cannot hold property. No, I agreed I couldn't buy it. Then what? It was a gift, said Benjamin. An assortment of gasps, snorts, and general sounds of astonishment and disbelief erupted from the other 4 commandos who, up to this point, had for the most part been content to let their leader handle everything. Yeah, right, said the commando who had remained behind in the bedroom, and the one nearest him back in the hallway nodded his helmet in vigorous agreement. Lieutenant Wynne once again kicked the shin of the commando nearest her, curiously, the only one of her unit who hadn't reacted. Oh, that's absurd, she said, and even if it weren't, there's no record of it in the planetary archive. Quan smiled at her husband, took his hand in hers, and lovingly raised it to her lips. The transaction may not have made it into your database, she said. It was a very recent gift. Doubtless you'll find it if you request an updated download. How recent? About 40 minutes ago, said Benjamin. Just about the time you came through the outer lock with your writs. Then it has no merit, snapped Wynne. The Emergency War Powers Act supersedes all commercial transfers. Except those of landed persons, said Quan, and her cheery demeanor threatened to break free and splash all of them with a sunshiny glow that she alone could see. Again, you really need to read the fine print. The founders of the Mars-Gov Confederacy rested supreme power in property owners. That was the deal that made the arcologies possible in the first place. But her stance grew more solid, and her tone shifted back until she sounded like she was addressing a doctoral candidate at some dissertation defense. Now, we're happy to let you come in and look around, as we've done, and you can continue to poke into things if you want to make a nuisance of yourself. You can even drag the staff off to some dungeon in the Carter Arcology if you're feeling petty. Though you won't be making any friends among a group of what I assure you are very loyal Mars residents. But my husband is strictly off limits. But he is not an enemy of the state, nor you make him into one on the basis of his planet of birth. He's as much a citizen of Mars as you, even more so given his new landed status. All that may be true, said Lieutenant Wynne, finding her voice at last, but he's also a citizen who has made repeated trips to Earth over the last several years. Of course he has, said Quan. And so have I. What of it? We weren't at war then, were we? And besides, a visit to the academic centers of major Earth metrocorps would hardly seem treasonous if we were. That's not for me to say, said Wynne. Well, that's certainly true, said Benjamin. Look, Lieutenant, as I've already stated, my wife is unwell, and your questioning is upsetting her. You've clearly reached the edge of your authority here, and no real harm done. Now, please, let's move on and conclude this in as civilized a way as possible. Would you and your team care to join us for breakfast? Our cook makes an especially delicious morning soup, and I'm sure there's more than enough for everyone.